Hello, I'm David, and welcome to the DevOps and FileMaker session. In this session, I'll be talking about DevOps, what it is, why you should know what it is, what problems it raises in FileMaker, but also how you can easily implement it actually. This session is based on a master thesis I did last year at the IT University of Copenhagen, where I developed a tool that will solve all the current DevOps issues. Just a little about me, I'm David. I've been a FileMaker developer since 2012. Where I started a company called Protobase, developing small CRM and inventory systems for small businesses. Then in 2019, I started a new company where I'm the CTO currently, called Carl, where we develop AI for farmers. So that's a total other industry, and we also use a lot of other programming languages. We do, though, use FileMaker for some backend stuff. Okay, so DevOps, what is it and why shouldn't you know what it is? You might not have heard the term before, but it's actually the most modern term used in order to describe a software's life cycle. So as you know, you are a developer, you know that your software goes through a lot of different steps, from planning to development to testing to deploying to monitoring and so on. DevOps is a term used to describe all those phases, and the goal of DevOps is actually to streamline all these processes as much as possible, because if they're streamlined and preferably automated, then the easier and faster and more reliably you can actually push new updates to your clients. And in these times where clients are more demanding, you want to release new updates to your software more frequently. So having all of these steps optimized and automated and integrated just saves you a lot of time and also gives you a more reliable product. Okay, let's talk about DevOps in FileMaker and why you may have had a hard time implementing it. You see, FileMaker is not really compatible with DevOps, and that's because of two things. Firstly, the .fmp 12 file format stores the software in an abstract storage representation and not in the concrete syntax, which you find in most other programming languages and development environments. Here, code is stored in an XML model that makes the file constantly runnable, so you don't have to build it, which is nice. But it's not, even though it's stored as an XML model, the file format itself is not stored in the concrete syntax. And that makes it incompatible with common tools and modern practices within version control systems and testing systems and deployment automation tools, etc. And the second thing that makes FileMaker kind of incompatible with DevOps is that the default technologies provided by FileMaker, even though we have the data API, the admin API, the CLI, we have everything, but the current technologies themselves are pretty decentralized and manual, and this just leads to a lot of ad hoc processes. So I've been really frustrated about this and now just become really passionate about actually getting DevOps compatible with FileMaker. So that's why I wanted to, in my thesis, come up with some solution to this. The first thing in my thesis was that I needed to know whether I was the only one having these issues or if a lot of other people like you were experiencing some of these issues as well. So the first thing I did was that I created a survey, which I posted in different Claris community groups, and I got 51 survey results back. There were two main goals of this survey, and it was to first understand the main DevOps challenges that FM developers experience, and secondly, I wanted to understand the common practices among you guys. How do you do stuff? How do you practice version control? How do you test? Do you even test? How do you deploy, etc.? So now I will actually just show you the results from this survey. And in general, the main DevOps challenges that you guys experience based on 45 responses is in this order: version control, deployment, testing, change logging, and monitoring. Then diving into version control, by 50 responses, 32% practices version control by manually editing file names, which is a tedious process and error prone. 30% also doesn't have the need, which I guess is okay if you have very, very small solutions, but as you know, if you have large solutions, it could be insanely complex to keep track of different versions. Then 26% uses some variable in code to do it. Looking at deployment with 50 responses, it is pretty apparent that half of you guys practice what we in the FileMaker world call live development. And live development is where you actually just make edits directly in the production version of the file, of the hosted file. And as you may know, this can be very error prone and can raise some critical issues if you have users connected directly to the version you are editing in. Then 43% are practicing or using the data migration tool, which is the best practice way of doing this, although require manual steps. And then 35% perform manual development, where you actually do have a copy, you have a development copy of your file, but you first make the development in the development version, and then you kind of do all the development again in the real hosted file. So that's like duplicate work. Regarding testing, based on 49 responses, it's pretty apparent that most developers actually only test using the debugger. And testing is also a pretty broad term, but in this modern day, we actually also like to think about testing as more regression testing and smoke testing and whatnot. So you might want to develop some unit tests or test some specific user stories or integration tests and etc. But this has become really difficult in FileMaker because we can't really use those common tools that exist for it. And there doesn't really exist any FileMaker tools for it. Regarding change logging, like documenting what changes did you actually make, 65% uses comments and code, which you would kind of prefer not to have that many comments in your code because it makes your code cluttered and it just becomes harder to read. So you want your change logging to be in a separate space than your code. Then 41% manages some sort of external log, like in a Google Docs document or similar. And regarding monitoring, with 50 responses, most developers actually solely just use the FileMaker admin console, which is fine. But if you have 10 or maybe 50 or even 100 servers, that's a lot of browser tabs to have open. I know some of the larger companies are also using Zabbix and other tools that can do this for you, but still 65% using only the admin console is a pretty high number, I think. So now it has become pretty apparent that I'm not the only one having these issues and struggling with actually adapting to modern practices. So based on those survey results, I have now visualized these issues in some progress diagrams. And for that process diagram, let's think about just a simple task to do. So we want to update a hosted solution. We solely just want to make an edit to a hosted production version of a FileMaker file. And I'm going to show you two different examples. First, using the most popular approach, which is the live development approach, which is the bad practice, but practiced by actually half of the developers in my survey. And secondly, an example showing the best practice approach using the data migration tool. This process flow shows how you would practice live development when updating a single file hosted on FileMaker server. So to the left, we have some general steps required in order to do this. And this does not look very complex because it's not. And this is also the dangerous part about this and why, of course, so many people practice it, because it's very simple. And now I'd like to show you the contrast of how this actually looks like using the best practice method, using the data migration tool. So before you freak out about all the different arrows here, I'll just say that you don't have to understand all these arrows. They are solely just provided actually to show what the problem is. It's way too chaotic. As before, on the left, we have all the different manual steps required in order for you to push a single update to a single file on FileMaker server. I'm not going to go through all the steps because you already know the steps, I presume. But as you know, it's a lot about handling files, like opening and closing files via admin console, downloading files and moving files around between servers or computers, cloning your file before you can actually do migration on it, and using the command line to do the migration, for instance. From these process diagrams, I did a lot of research, and I wanted to find out how could I measure the DevOps maturity, like from this. How do we do that? And I found two of the most respected models to describe DevOps maturity that exists. The one is by Fighter, and the other one is from Busena. And here, these two different models, they are independent models, and they describe different areas of DevOps. Ideally here, you would have the bar filled out all the way to the right in order for the specific capability being at the maximum maturity level. It's also, of course, important to say here that DevOps is a new term. Nothing is really standardized yet. There's not really a common understanding completely about what makes this maturity, but that's why I've chosen these two independent models. And now I'd like to show you how the previous task, where we wanted to push an update on a file to the server in a completely different way that is optimized and automated using a tool that I've developed called Devin. Devin consists of a Mac app and a Windows Server distribution currently. Devin is in beta, and it will soon also be available for the server in Linux and Mac OS, of course. So I go down to my dock, and here I have Devin. When Devin has opened up, I get to see the different projects that I have. And Devin is actually providing what you would think of as, if you have experience with programs like Xcode, Devin actually provides an Xcode-like feeling to FileMaker development. For this example, we'll be using Carl. When I click on Carl, it opens up the project workspace for Carl. In here is actually where I do everything related to DevOps for my Carl files. It has 4 different tabs up here. The first one being the configuration. So this is where I configure and handle settings for this project, basically. In Devin, Devin is built around the practice that you want to separate your software by concern, as it's called. So we want not to have a single solution file with all the functionality and all the code. We would actually like to split it out so that we have a file handling different parts of the software. And that's, of course, up to you how you do that. And you also might not do it, but this is what Devin is kind of built for. So in Devin, a file is actually referred to as a module. So in this project, I have a bunch of different files. Then in the branches tab, this is actually where I interact with these files. And this is where I perform operations on them. And it's also where I document changes for them. So you have a master branch that actually defines what is your production files looking like. And then we also have a development branch, which is hosting all the development copies that we're working on, so that we don't make edits directly to the master files. I also have a recovery stack over here, where I can actually, per module, I can see what previous versions exist. And this is not a feature that is working yet, but soon there'll be an ability to restore and roll back a version if an error happened or so. I can also, if I click on a module, I can see the specific changelog for this module, for this version. If I click on it again, I get this drop-down menu where I can now, like this, see the complete history of edits to this file. And lastly, there's a deployment tab that actually shows the actual deployment files on the servers. Here I can see how many users are connected to the file at the moment, when was the last activity. I also get an overview of what version, what file is on here, and whether it is on the latest version. On the left here, I can have different, what in Devin I call deployment groups. So for instance, you might not want to have one file for all your clients. Maybe you want to have one file per client that you copy out. So this is a way to group files together. But you can actually also use it if you want, for instance, a test group. So when you deploy a new version of a file, maybe you don't want to deploy it directly just to production. So here I'll be showing an example where I have a test deployment group that I will deploy to first. And this could of course be on a different test server or whatever. Okay, so let's dive in to this. So let's say I would like to make a change to my module called field condition service. I'll press this one, and then I'll press branch. This will then copy the master file and deploy it on the development branch for us to make edits on it. Devin here is communicating with FileMaker's native APIs like the admin API and the data API, and also using the command line interface. And sometimes these tasks might take a while because, as you know, opening and closing files on the server sometimes it takes a while. So here Devin is waiting for that. And I think we are soon ready. Yep. So now here we have a development copy of the field condition service master file. And it automatically incremented the version number to 1.2.5 here. If I want to access this, I can actually just click this one. Then I log into it. And now I've opened this file. So this is also a way of actually not even using FileMaker's built-in overview of files, but the idea is here that you actually access all your files, all your development files at least, through the Devin workspace, which is just a very centralized and integrated way of doing it. Okay, so we have opened up this file. So now let's make an edit to this file. I'll open up the script workspace, and I would like to implement some error handling in this script that fetches some data from an external API. So let's say I would like to check whether the pulley ID is empty or not. So I'll say if it's empty, pulley ID should. I would like that it should return error. And I save it. I can keep it open, or I can close it. Now I'll keep it open. I want to log that I added error handling to weather fetch. And this is a feature. I could also say that it's a bug fix or a deprecation of something. And I add it. And it's now added to the changelog here. So if other people, if any other from my team would also be making changes to this file, they would also appear here, and I would be able to see here who made what changes. Now on this development file, I also have another button, and this one, it gives me all the different operations I can make on this development file. And before I release it, I would like to run my tests that I've developed for this file. So I click test. Now it's finding the different tests in the file, and there was an error. And click here and see, okay, this test failed. I can also go into this window, the runner window, and select tests here, and then I get an overview like this. Here I can also see the duration of the test, and I can see some different information about who performed the test, what was the method, and what version, etc. Okay, let's find out why the test failed. I'll open up the script workspace again. And Devin requires that your tests are hosted in a parent folder called tests here. In here right now, I have two different tests. I practice the naming convention for tests, the given, when, then convention. You can use whatever convention you do, and you probably have a total different naming convention. I see here the test that failed was the given fetch when passed missing poly ID, then return 10,002 error. That one failed. Okay. And actually I know why. That's because I didn't return the error code. I just returned a string called error. So I'll fix that. And I will run the test again. And it succeeded. Perfect. And also what you might notice is that here, when I had a failed test, I'm actually not able to release the module. And that's because of a setting in the configuration page where I can define that I would only allow to release a module if all tests have passed. That can also be disabled. But now all the tests completed. That's perfect. So now we know that it's ready to roll. I will quickly just add a bug fix. I will say fixed. I will say fixed 10,002 error handling. Now that's added. And now I can release it. I press release and I give it a new version number. Let's say 1.2.6. Now it will trigger the release process. It will do a lot of file handling and it will push the different files. And now it was released. It shows a few warnings, and that's nothing to worry about. It's just that it's retrying a few calls here. I can see nothing, no issue. So now this has now replaced the previous file on the master branch. And in the releases pane, I can now see the new version here, and I can see that no migrations have been triggered. Also in the deployments phase, it now shows that there's an update available to these two production files. In the configuration, I could have actually enabled auto deploy and migrate after release. That would actually automatically have initiated the update process. But if you like the control to manually update it or to schedule an update, this is the way to do it. And now I would actually want to only just update the test deployment group. I won't update the one that my users are connected to. So I press update, and here I can choose update now. It will just initiate the update right now, or I can schedule it for later. If you have service windows, this might be a nice way to schedule it for like an overnight schedule. I will just press update now. If I open the runner window again, where we saw the tests, there's actually also a migrations pane. Here, I get an overview of all the migrations that I've done. And we can see here that now there's actually one initiated for the one we just triggered. So here I can see that it's the group tests, and it's from this version to this version. It's on this server, and it was a manual triggering. And here I can follow the status, and I can also abort it if I like. This process will take a few minutes because Devin, the way Devin works is that it's actually a scheduled, it's a schedule that will run system scripts, and that will only be triggered every minute. So while this is happening, I can show you something else here. In the configuration tab, I can also specify if I want a certain minimum inactivity period. For instance, maybe I don't want to update any file that has had a user connected within the last 30 minutes. I can also specify how many concurrent migration processes I would allow simultaneously. This would avoid server crashes if you have concurrent DMT processes, for instance. There is also a monitoring window that is actually just a centralized space for all your servers where you can see all the different files and their statuses. So this would be an alternative to have different browser tabs open. Okay, going back, we can see it's now been past 2 minutes, and it's actually migrating right now. And it is now completed, we see. And we see that it took 4 minutes. As a last thing, the runner window also has a convenient console log space here. So this is actually where you can see what's going on, what Devin is actually doing in the background. So if you interpret any errors, you can actually see all the different logs that are created for this. So if we want to look at how this would look like in a process in the process diagram, this is how that looks like. So here on your developer computer, every developer needs to have the app installed. And on the development server, you have the engine Devin file installed. And that is all communication is just triggered from the engine. So now all the different processes are centralized and automated and streamlined. If we want to compare with how the common practices would be to use the DMT tool versus using Devin, we can see that whereas before we had 10 manual steps per solution file, whereas using Devin, it's actually only 2 button clicks for all files, if you have that auto deploy and everything enabled, of course. Let's now look at how Devin actually improved our DevOps. And using the before mentioned models, we can now see that Devin actually added DevOps maturity to almost all of the steps that we analyzed here. I won't go into detail in how this was calculated, but it's all part of my thesis paper, which is available on request afterwards if you want to see it. Now, I know that some tools does exist that handle some of this, but the issue and the conclusion of my thesis is that you can't optimize a team's general DevOps maturity by only optimizing a few of the phases of DevOps. DevOps is requiring that everything is streamlined together, and that's why every part of the phases of DevOps needs to be integrated together. In the thesis, there will be a comparison of other tools as well. So if you want to dive even further and see all the different tools, you can see how each tool mitigated the different areas that was discovered as part of the developer survey. Thank you for following this session. I'm really happy if you're still here, if you stayed on. I hope it wasn't too tough. If you want to try Devin Beta, you can download it for free on devin.fm. I'll be available in the booth section, so you can contact me there or we can talk there. See you.